Howdy, it's Anthony Marley Love, and welcome to another episode of Traveling While Black, and to the final episode of our Traveling While Black Across America series, Volume 1.
Yes, we're so excited to show you our fourth city, and that is Billings, Montana. And we can't wait for you to see our experience in the Treasure State.
Again, with this being the final episode of the series, we just want to send another special thank you to all of the sponsors that helped make this series happen.
Yes, thank you again to our sponsors, and for you, take a look at this episode and let us know what you think. A few years back, we started our show to help others interested in exploring the Pacific Northwest.
Inspired by the spirit of the Negro Motorist Green Book, we wanted to be a valuable resource to Black and BIPOC travelers, while also connecting them to some of the most amazing places in this part of the country.
We thought, what if we took our show to some other cities across the United States? What new things could we learn? What new stories could we hear?
So we decided to find out and picked 4 cities:
Kansas City, Missouri;
Denver, Colorado;
Cheyenne, Wyoming;
Billings, Montana, and loaded up in the car to drop in to experience each for a couple of days.
And of course, rate our experience for the drive, the amount of fun, and most importantly, how comfortable we felt visiting as a Black traveler.
I'm Anthony Love.
I'm Marley Love.
Come along with us on Traveling While Black Across America,
Volume 1.
Finally, for the fourth and final stop in our Traveling While Black Across America series, Volume 1, we headed north from the Wyoming capital of Cheyenne to Big Sky country of Montana. So to check out the city of Billings.
Located at the south central part of the state, Billings is the most populous city within, and the biggest reason why we chose it as a city to visit since this is our first trip to Montana.
According to our research, the city boasts its history, its amazing access to the outdoors, and a vibrant craft beer scene, all of which was very similar to the previous Rocky Mountain state cities we had visited on this road trip.
Yes, just like the other Rocky Mountain states, Billings has a deep connection to the railroad industry. But the thing about Billings is that it has its own unique twist on that story, with distinct similarities to each of its Rocky Mountain neighbors we previously visited on this road trip.
Yep, just like Cheyenne, Billings' origins are attributed to the railroad, but it's also similar to Denver in how the railroad played a role in segregating the Black population.
Just like the city of Cheyenne, Wyoming, Billings was formed because of a railroad. The railroad that formed it, the Northern Pacific Railroad.
The year was 1882. For context, Cheyenne had been established by the Union Pacific 15 years prior, and a lot had happened since then. See, the Territorial Suffrage Act of 1867 was passed, and it provided more opportunities for African American men living in the West than living in the South. For example, the act gave them the right to vote.
But within that 15 years prior to Billings being founded, the West had developed its own tactics in dealing with their Black and immigrant populations. The tactic that Old West Billings deployed seems somewhat like a historical prelude to redlining.
See, the railroad company intentionally divided up the city by running a railroad through it. On the north side, where the depot was located, promoted more civic development. The south side, on the other hand, housed Chinese, Japanese, and Black residents, along with the prostitution and vice of the city.
The multicultural south side of the city would offer an abundance of opportunities for the Germans who migrated from Russia and the Hispanic migrants who were attracted to the area to work for the sugar beet factory. But the Black population forced to live on the south side of the city still was faced with discrimination despite the promise of the West.
Yes, within Billings, jobs were available, but African American men had difficulty obtaining employment. Schools were integrated, but there were policies in place that created segregation. Even the local newspapers would use the racist phrase "Darktown" when referring to the south side of the city.
Yes, it was bad. But luckily for the Black Billings pioneers back then, the first African American to settle in the city was Walker Browning.
Walker Browning was a badass. Born in Missouri, like some other famous people you may know, his father was a former slave that died in the Civil War. At the age of 15, Walker had to care for his 2 younger siblings after his mother passed away.
Browning was able to relocate his siblings from the South and take them along with his wife and children to the West. Walker joined on a historic survey for America's first national park, Yellowstone. From there, he moved his family again to Deadwood, South Dakota, to give gold mining a shot.
But when Browning moved his family to Billings in 1882 and became the first residents to build on the south side, they would become influential. Eventually, all of the members of the family would use their influence to help their neighbors cope with the oppression and advocate for social mobility.
Yes, Walker and his son Charles both earned leadership roles in the local political party. Charles helped establish a club to organize black male voters and help with local political organizing. Walker's wife Ruth and daughter Claudia also played a role in the community by promoting women's social mobility, higher education, and organizing and helping in developing the city's only black church.
Yep, this was dope black history to come across. And knowing how black cowboys
And cowgirls
have contributed to the history of Old West Montana, we were excited to see how it and Walker Browning's contributions were commemorated within the city of Billings.
And of course, we were very interested in how people like us would find entertainment within the city. Although we will say that thanks to our drive from Cheyenne, packing a few surprises along the way, our hopes for the city were high.
Drive grade. Before we get into it, let us explain our new expanded drive grade rating scale.
We are expanding the rating scales for all of our categories, going from a 5-point scale to a 10-point scale. This way we can add more context to why we are rating experiences the way we are.
For a drive grade, that means we are breaking it down like this. The quality of the views along the route, the access to gas stations and restaurants along the route, the easiness of the route, or in other words, the route doesn't require a lot of highway switching, or even worse, hits a lot of traffic. Also, the quality of roadside attractions along the route. Finally, you already know, the quality of the parking options. Hopefully there are a lot of options, and even better, there are free options. The drive from Cheyenne to Billings was around 7 hours. Of course, not including the stops. And yes, we were going to have some stops on this drive.
This was our first time driving through this part of the country. Not having to deal with the windstorm this time around, we were able to appreciate the beauty of the landscape along the way, even with the little bit of rain we did hit.
To us, the Big Sky nickname was very fitting because the way the land is spread out makes the blue sky seem somewhat exaggerated. Another great thing about the drive on this leg of the road trip is that it would once again provide us with some really unique stops.
An interesting mix of amazing, confusing, and just plain weird. And right off the bat, we hit up the weird, pulling off in Douglas, Wyoming to see the world's largest jackalope statue.
A jackalope is a mythical animal described simply as a jackrabbit with antelope horns. And the city of Douglas, Wyoming has declared itself to be the jackalope capital of America. Look, if you're really interested, every year the town plays host to Jackalope Day.
But we will say that during our drive through the town, it felt weird, so be aware.
While our next stop wasn't as weird, it was a bit confusing. That stop was in Sheridan, Wyoming.
In Sheridan, we were attracted by signs that indicated the Black Diamond Trail. We weren't really sure what this was all about at the time, and shoddy service made it nearly impossible to do any research on site, but it just sounded important.
We did see that Sheridan is the 6th largest city in Wyoming, so there's more than likely a lot more to see with the trail. But more importantly for us was that being in Sheridan meant that we were only 20 minutes outside of the Montana state line.
It would be in Montana that we would make our most amazing stop, not only on this leg of the road trip, but possibly the road trip overall, the Little Bighorn Battlefield National Monument.
The National Park Service describes this site as, "This area memorializes the U.S. Army's 7th Cavalry Crow and Akura Scouts, and the Lakotas, Cheyennes, and Arapaho, and one of the American Indians' last armed efforts to preserve their way of life."
We definitely took our time here. First strolling through the museum within the visitor center, we could not believe some of the unbelievable artifacts that played a part in telling the story of the historical battle that took place where we were standing.
After the museum, we drove through the paved driveway that carved through the park, periodically pulling off at some of the monuments commemorating important moments during the battle. Everywhere we stood, we could feel the strong energy of the souls that fought and lost their lives during the fight.
Yes, this was powerful. Prior to this, I didn't know much about this battle, but after having experienced the Little Bighorn National Monument, I wanted to learn more.
As for me, it was really special to be standing at the monument on top of Last Stand Hill, also known as the name of the battle I most heard growing up, Custer's Last Stand. See, growing up, I would sympathize with the native side throughout the retelling of this country's westward expansion history. And because the native side won, not surprisingly, the Battle of Little Bighorn was one of my favorite battles to learn about. Still, on top of the Native Americans winning the battle, this also taught me of what obstacle can be overcome when people put away their differences and come together.
That spirit of coming together continued when it was ultimately decided to commemorate markers honoring the Native Americans who fought at Little Bighorn. Yes, this is definitely a stop that we can recommend anyone experiencing, even if you're not a fan of history.
After our amazing experience at the Little Bighorn site, we had about an hour drive left until our final destination in Billings. And we could say that hour went by pretty quickly.
Our last drive leg on our cross-country road trip seemed like a great experience with the great views and mix of weird, confusing, and amazing stops. But how would it fare against our rating scale?
Let's see. Let's start with the views. As we mentioned, the beauty of the landscape with the big blue sky was breathtaking as we would imagine a drive through big sky country would be. So, all points here.
In regard to roadside amenities, there were a good amount of options for places to pull off and get gas and food along the route between Cheyenne and Billings, so we will give 2 points here.
Our score for the difficulty of the route could be somewhat surprising, being that it took us on 3 different highways. Still, the open road and even more so maybe the 80-mile-per-hour speed limit made the drive seem easy and even freeing. So, both points here.
What's not surprising is us giving this drive all the points for roadside attractions. The Little Bighorn stop alone is what sets this drive apart.
I was somewhat surprised that we have to dock Billings a point for parking. Around the city, parking spots were actually hard to come by, and I actually had to pay a lot of times. But because it was affordable parking, we'll still give 1 point.
In tallying up the point, even the numbers bear that our drive from Cheyenne to Billings was our favorite of the whole road trip, coming out a 9 out of 10 for our drive grade rating.
Wow, 9 out of 10 is the best drive grade score we've given this whole road trip. This was a great start to Billings. Unfortunately, we were heading into the realization that the drive would be the peak of our Billings experience. Level of fun. Again, since we are expanding the rating scales for all of our categories, going from a 5-point scale to a 10-point scale, let us explain our level of fun.
For our 10-point level of fun rating, we will be considering the amount and quality of activities offered within the vicinity of the location, the variety of activities that apply to the different visitor demographics. And what we mean by this is, are the activities better suited for couples, singles, or families? Are they more suited for younger or older folks? And we are also taking into account the quality of restaurant options, the affordability of the area. Finally, are there any special events happening during our visit? Just looking around Billings, we could tell right away that if we were going to really enjoy this place, we would need to dive deep into the Billings culture.
And beautiful people, we mean deep.
Yes, we hopped into some more local-like attire and hit the streets to experience what Billings had to offer.
Based on our research, in order to experience the best of Billings, we would need to check out the craft brew scene, the outdoors, and the city's history. Since it would be the cleanest activity, we decided to experience the history first.
For our Billings history experience, we went to the Western Heritage Center Museum that's housed in the historic Parmley Billings Memorial Library building in downtown. The museum offers both permanent and traveling interactive exhibits, as well as a collection of over 400 oral histories and 40,000 historic items and photographs, all pertaining to the people, places, and events of the Yellowstone River Valley and the Northern High Plains region.
We were actually pretty impressed by the exhibits in the museum. During our time, we were able to see some really intriguing ones geared toward Native American experiences in the West. One was about a Native photographer, and another was a more emotionally riveting exhibit about the Native conversion schools.
Yes, that one was tough, but still a great museum overall. After the museum, it was time to loosen up, so we decided to jump into the Billings beer scene by hitting the Billings Brew Trail.
The Billings Brew Trail is a self-guided tour along a 1.5-mile loop through the historic downtown region that takes visitors to 9 breweries, 3 distilleries, a cider mill, and even a winery.
We hit a couple places up, but the one that stood out the most was a local distillery, Unnamed. Not only was their product top tier, but the owner also had a Seattle connection.
Yes, the tour, which allowed us to sample local beers, ciders, and spirits, was an okay taste of the local Billings culture. But what we were most excited for was to experience the Billings outdoors.
If Cheyenne's Frontier Days claims the granddaddy of them all rodeos, then we thought Billings could boast having access to the granddaddy of them all national parks, Yellowstone.
Unfortunately, we thought wrong. The fact is that Yellowstone National Park's getaway garden entrance is over 2.5 hours away, and that's with no traffic.
So needless to say that we didn't get to experience Yellowstone this trip. But Billings offered a bunch of other great outdoor options to experience the Montana outdoors, like on the many trails that run along the rim rocks that surround the city.
For our experience, we headed just outside the city to Zimmerman Park to check out the views and get in the hike. The park offers a loop trail that runs a little over 3 miles.
The trail offers a variety of routes, but regardless of which one you take, you will not be shorted the breathtaking views. Our hike was definitely a calming and much needed experience at the end of our road trip.
The views, the nature, yes, it's easy to say that this by far was our favorite experience during our time in Billings. Having checked off activities in all of the major categories of Billings notoriety, we were ready to put it against our fun scale.
So Billings, how'd you do? Let's start with the quality of activities. While we loved the exhibits in the museum, the experience was more emotionally weighing than actually fun. The Brew Trail was okay, but to be honest, we forgot to scan the QR code at a couple of the places and can't really remember what we were supposed to get a part of that deal.
If we were to consider a different activity than what we ended up choosing in Billings, then our best bet would be gambling at a casino. You see, casinos are all around Billings, everywhere you look. Not really our priority of fun, but hey, who are we kidding? You know we're from the Show Me State, so we were gonna hit at least a slot or two.
Yes, even though we couldn't deny our gambling DNA, we have to knock Billings for 1 point for the category. Lack of options and abundance of casinos also hurts the city in terms of demographic applicability, so no points there.
But Billings does bounce back by getting all the points for affordability. Yes, the Billings prices weren't as cheap as Cheyenne, but still really affordable. And best of all, the state of Montana does not have sales tax. We really love that.
As for quality of restaurants, while we did have a really great restaurant experience at a couple of spots, including one of the better steakhouses in the city, finding other options were far and few between, so we'll deduct a point there.
Yes, the food overall in the city was a bit of a drop-off from Cheyenne. Finally, for special events, Billings is another city without a professional sports team. Although during our visit, the local Metro Park First Interstate Arena was hosting a professional bull riding event. Since we had the attire, we thought about dropping in to really experience the Billings locals in their natural environment.
But y'all, after 2 weeks on the road, dropping into unfamiliar places, and some of which we did not see another Black person for miles in between, we were just too emotionally worn out to go in.
Some of you already know that sometimes it does get heavy traveling while Black.
So all in all, the museum was awesome, the nature was breathtaking, and we met a cool local distiller with a Seattle connection on the brew tour. When put up to our scrutiny of our level of fun scale, Billings, Montana comes out to a 4 out of 10.
Ouch, not too great, but we can't lie. There was just something in the air in Billings that we just couldn't shake. And it wasn't until we analyzed our time there through our comfort level scale did we realize what it could be.
Comfortability for Black people. So here we go. For perhaps one of the most important categories, this is how we are measuring our comfortability for Black people rating.
For one, we will be considering the amount of Black people we saw during our visit. Also, we will be considering the most recent Black population numbers.
Other points of consideration are how prevalent is the Black history of the area, also the visibility of signs that indicate inclusion.
Finally, we will be basing it on how comfortable or uncomfortable we feel personally walking around the city and into different establishments. Let's start with the amount of other Black people we saw during our visit and the Black population numbers. See, in Billings, we saw a few more other Black people than we saw in Cheyenne. What's interesting is that Billings has a lower Black population percentage.
And when we say low, we mean low. Less than 1% as a matter of fact. But that seems to be the case for the state overall. And that's why we are giving 2 points for Black people seen, but still 0 for Black population numbers. As for prevalence of Black history, we have to say that Billings drops the ball here as well. The Black history of the city isn't really visible at all. This is a shame because the state of Montana has a rich history of Black contributors to its story. We really wondered what the other cities around the state do to reflect that part of their history. So, no points for Billings here. Now, what about visibility of inclusion? We did notice that the Native history was incorporated within the city's history, especially in the museum we visited. So, Billings will give a point for signs of inclusion. But finally, how does all this contribute to our overall feeling during our visit? This too was interesting for us during our time in Billings. What we noticed was that our radar was up a lot more walking into places within this city than it was in Cheyenne. Still, we didn't have any overtly bad encounters.
Yes, the vibe around the city did feel a lot more cold, and look, we know what that means, being that we live in a city that carries a cold moniker. However, we did meet some local residents on the trail within the park that were actually talkative.
Yeah, one of the locals gave us recommendations of local attractions, and the other gave us insight. See, both were extremely nice, but the second local made the point for us not to broadcast how great Billings was, so not to attract more people to move in there.
At first, we were somewhat taken aback, but then we thought about it. Perhaps, possibly, the response spoke to the actual source of the perceived coldness within the city. More specifically, that's possible that the coldness doesn't come from a place of racism, but more so of seclusion.
You see, Montana is a huge state, and perhaps most people that come out here to get away from people. All people. Possibly. Anyway, at least the nature was beautiful. And as we say,
nature loves Black people.
So we'll give 1 point for our personal comfort level.
After tallying up all the scores, the math comes out to a grade that accurately reflects our feelings about our experience overall. We give Billings a 4 out of 10 for our comfortability for Black people rating.
Well, Billings, not great, but definitely opportunity to improve. As for us, you can't win them all. But more importantly, this was it for our first TWB Across America series.
So we turned in our rental car and headed to the Billings airport to catch our 2-hour flight back home to Seattle, Washington. The flight was nice for us both to just finally sit back and just enjoy the ride the whole way.
Yeah, we were happy to be home, but once we were home, we definitely missed the open road. See, on this road trip, we learned a lot. Yep, a lot about this country, and even a lot about ourselves.
We cannot wait until our next road trip, and if you've been planning, or if you've never thought about it, we definitely recommend you taking the time and planning yourself a road trip.
Even if it's not that far, just hop in the car and hit the road. There's so much out there to see, and you better believe that we will absolutely be back out there to see more.
And we thank you for coming along with us on this journey from Wentzville, Missouri to Billings, Montana. Be sure to follow us to make sure you don't miss our next adventure.
Until next time, beautiful people, stay up, stay true, and do you.
Be sure to subscribe to our channel and follow us on all of our social media platforms to see our previous adventures.
Until next time, beautiful people, stay up, stay true, and do you.